Thank you very much. I'm as inexperienced in Zoom as you cannot imagine today. However, it's true. So perhaps I will do some strange things during this conversation. However, when Alice approached me to talk in your wonderful series, Alice, I had the impression that to do a little pitch on our office or anything like that, it wasn't too interesting. That perhaps it was an interesting opportunity to talk with Giovanna, who's here. I'm very happy that also she accepted to do that. And to, in a way, to continue the talk we have been having for quite a long time. Maybe also to understand for ourselves where we are today in times of Corona, I would say, or after or midst or whatever. It's very complicated to judge where we really are. And to have an opportunity to use the medium of Zoom or Zoom lecture or Zoom conversation in our advantage. No? I mean, of course, we would have preferred to have this conversation face-to-face. At the same time, that has other limitations, as we know, and you have to be in the room, which I think is still very beautiful. However, here we are in this virtual room, and to a certain extent, I believe it's already central to our topic for tonight. No, I mean that is the distinction between together in the place, whether it was a CCA or a building or part of I would say discovery of architecture or the object of architecture, and here in our virtual space, where of course many of these elements, many of these tangible things, which I think, I believe we share that are so dear to us, are at most represented. So I don't know, Giovanna, how you look at this. And of course, before we really start our conversation, I'd like to give you a little bit of word. Then maybe to give a general idea of how we want to talk. We will probably talk with a shared screen. I will share a screen with some pictures. We discussed a little bit in advance, meaning we believe that images or objects or things often talk much better than all the talk, if I can quote the music which was just playing before. But that doesn't take away that I should now give the word to you, Giovanna.
Thanks, Kersten, and thanks, Alice and Archiato Foundation, and for organizing this and inviting us and all of you for being here. It's true that this is a kind of new territory, but somehow I find that it's interesting that every time becomes slightly different. It depends of like who is actually in the room. So it's interesting also to imagine that this is also a new space to be curated by an institution. So somehow in this time, and then I think your choice of the music of the talk at the beginning is like has been literally become a time where we talk a lot, and somehow there is this space where we tends to exchange more thinking than maybe before, because forced in this space that is also a space where what we see are all more our persona than objects somehow. So I think it's interesting also to think about what is the object of showing and exposing in this moment. So as Kersten had said, I think we have talked a lot already because we worked together on many instances in together on exhibition, and I think in very different roles somehow. Sometime I think Kersten and your office actually experimented like all the three possible roles that, let's say, you can engage with an institution. So once you design a show that you didn't curate at least this is what you did at CCA, you didn't curate the content, but somehow the content was brought to you to reflect how you will design the space and how the design become content at the same time. a second time you were a curator, a scholar, a researcher of a content that you cared, or a office that you cared, and that we have the archive at CCA. And the third time was more actually a show where maybe you played all the three roles of like co-curating, being about your practice, and so somehow showing your ideas, and then also designing the way those ideas will be carried to the visitor. So I think through this we went through all these different roles also that you person has in a show, but we also have thought very much in this is like what is how we should think about architectural exhibition, what is the meaning of architectural exhibition.
No, Giovanna, absolutely. So, I mean, of course, I tell this also a little bit to the audience. We do this conversation. I think we also want to do this to understand also how we can talk to each other in an almost fluent way, being so far away. I mean, trying to almost emulate a conversation in a room. Of course, why do I say this? Also because everything we've been doing together, and I would like to start in a way sharing my screen. I see if I manage this. I mean, this is already a very big task for me. Let's see now. Yeah, so far so good. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. I think being together in a room, I think has been, and that room could have been a big place as well, but I think have been crucial to our experience until now. And of course, without wanting to desperately overemphasize our current condition, because I believe there's also a danger in that, no? That is, you like all of a sudden now think that the world has ended and we can only talk about its end, which would be a bit sad. I felt it was also right to talk about it together, because of course, the idea of closeness and distance, I mean, you just talked, Giovanna, about, I mean, indeed, being involved in architecture exhibitions in different roles. I mean, that certainly counts for us, but that also counts for you as well. I mean, you've been, gradually moving after other roles as an editor, amongst others, into the world of architectural exhibition, and now in a way directing, in a way, the meta program of such an institution. But what I believe had been central to our conversation from the beginning was, of course, on the one hand, the problem of architecture, its physicality, its tangibility to a certain extent, and to what extent the object, which is often not the architecture itself, can relate to that. And then, of course, very, very directly related to this, also to what extent one has to really experience, so to speak, a show. And of course, there, interestingly, CCA being perhaps one of the most, if not the most important place, certainly today, of architecture exhibition and also of archive of architecture. It's not exactly the place most visited in the world, I mean, in the physical sense. So, I mean, and it's also not a new conversation for us, but I believe it is it's central also to how to say, to dealing with an issue which is currently, with Corona, considered even a bigger issue than ever before, but was perhaps always there. Now, in order to introduce that, I just wanted, almost on an anecdotal level, bring back Alice a little bit in the mix by saying, look, showing architecture for us, Giovanna, has of course very much, and these kind of weird numbers are office numbers, but apart from that, it's unimportant, has had a lot to do with meeting each other in 2010, which is now exactly 10 years ago. It's in that sense beautiful. I mean, beautiful also for our conversation today, when essentially Alice introduced one to the other here in the in the garden of the Corderia in Venice, right, where we have been installing, and I'm not going to go too deep in it, but it's perhaps an interesting moment to introduce the problem of physicality and scale in architecture. We've been installing this show, which was not much more than this old barn, which is meanwhile totally destroyed. When I was there recently, that was pretty clear, and was already pretty derelict back then, and where a set of photographs by Bas Prinsen and some collages by us were shown in this space. And in a way, the space was, I remember very well, we argued, turned into architecture by the most ephemeral of means, which was that roof, right, Giovanna? So in a sense, for me, what it brings on the table is many things. First of all, it's Venice, so it's a place where you travel to. Its importance has to do with the fact that it's Venice and it's not around the corner here or around the corner, I don't know where you are. So it's a place which by consensus is considered a place people are ready to visit because there is something to see at least a few times every 2 years. Of course, it brings, despite even the topic of representation, the picture pass, the one-to-one and so forth, it brings, I think, on the table many elements which I think are very dear to you, Giovanna. Yeah, where can you show architecture? If you show architecture, is it fundamental that you visit it, you think? And knowing that perhaps it's not so easy to visit everything, what can you do about it? I mean, and how, meaning even before February this year, this is central to your current operation.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and I think the obviously we all end up in this kind of new condition of digital, but for years, and I think really much also with Mirko, we have worked in kind of like moving the CCA of really still being kind of grounded in Montreal, but being able to, I would not say simply talk to a larger audience, but really trying to understand what are the issues that goes beyond the place where we are. And then this, I think, was also from the beginning for the CCA. So I think somehow the place we always have intended it as the place where ideas are brought up or ideas are created, more the physical place that is like we are a kind of Montreal-based or Canadian-based institution. But somehow your question also has inside the idea of like what is architecture, and when it means like visit a place is like which is that place you visit, and I think that's another large discussion that we always have carried at CCA of like what we intend as architecture, and somehow the emphasis that we have on archives is really about that, is that architecture is not just the building, or maybe is also the discrepancies that there are between the idea and the building, or are all the things that do not get into the building, or like, and so it really depends which is the place you want to visit. Somehow to me it's like which is the kind of idea of architecture you are keen on.
For example, Giovanna, I mean, so you now, I mean, so Mirko was leading the institution before you. Now you took over Mirko Zardini's place. I think in the years under Mirko Zardini, if I can say that, and please correct me if I interpret that wrong. I mean, the archive and the accumulation of material in the archive has been there long before both of you were involved in the institute. But I would argue that in the last couple of years, as you just said, to activate to a certain extent the material of the archive had been crucial. So of course, I would say it's slightly ironic to a certain extent that you activate an archive in a place which is not too frequently visited. So on the one hand, so the object of show that object is crucial. On the other hand, and I mean, I almost have to relay on, we come back to that later, you relay very much also on this, the book, which then shows and documents the very, in a way, show and the very archive, or at least a reproduction of the reproduction of what in fact is so dear to you. So how do you see that?
I think you know, the CCA is still a young institution. It's like just 40 years old. And I think there has been several shifts. As you said, the archive was always there. I would say not really from the beginning, like the major acquisition of the archives started more at the end of the 90s. And the first one was actually, there are numbered, like as you have for a project. So 001 is actually the archive of Ernest Cormier. That is one of the most prominent figures of architecture here in Montreal. And then I think was later on that was an opening up to archive that goes obviously beyond Canadian figures, and very much concentrated on a kind of key moment that actually also is the same moment where the CCA started. So let's say Peter Eisenman archive, and then followed James Sterling, Cedric Price, and so on. So the shift that has been after that has been, I would say, with Mirko, has been to expand that to, I would say, a slightly different geography. So, you know, the archive of Iñaki, Ábalos Herreros, the archive of Humberto Riva, the archive, so and most recently, for example, the archive Argentinian architect Amancio Williams. So the geography has shifted somehow in the kind of attention of start to open up a kind of larger history of architecture somehow, or figures of architecture, CISA also, as you mentioned. But in that, I think the work that we have done and we're doing is to say FCCA is, and that's, I think, is the beauty of this institution, has been always thought as a place where you have these simultaneous things all happening at the same time. So you are collecting, but you're also a contemporary institution. And somehow you should not act as just a repository. You also have a voice. So how you then participate to this discourse at the same time. So this triangle of things means that collecting, exposing, doing editorial work, they are very intertwined. And so is an exhibition the culmination moment of a research, is a way of starting and saying the material is here, people should come to look at it. Is like you can actually imagine these different things happening on a timeline with very different meaning. So it is the Ábalos Herreros show, for example, the 3 exhibitions that we did, and you were one of the curators, is a closing moment, is a kind of statement on what the archive is, or is a moment of showing and activating the archive, as you say, in order for others then to discover what is there, and then continuing so I think we are carefully thinking of like how the curatorial moment and how the publication, how the online is part of this. You create a discourse on an archive, or how you can, you say, activate the archive beyond receiving scholars that will do anyhow their work on it. Mm-hmm. So the other things was, for me, for example, of this project we did with you, was fundamental that obviously you are also an academic and a scholar, but for me was also fundamental that we picked actually 3 practices, so that also the idea that the archives are something that are alive, not only for scholars to look at, but actually for architects to engage with.
Yeah, and of course, but then what I show now, of course, I mean, because I guess most people might not know, these are photographs of 1/3 of the Ábalos and Herreros show, so to speak, in the sense that neither of the shows coincided. This is when we curated, let's say, their work, which is in a way a very interesting, I would say, exercise. That is that you do not do one show, but you do 3 shows, as you just said. So in a way, you have 3 times the opportunity to deal with all the material. It's also not like you do 3 rooms, of which one room is done by one, I don't know, group of people or a person, and the second one by another one, and together it's a show. No, it's in a way, it was literally 3 ways of looking at the same work, correct? So in that sense, this way of looking seems interesting, because I think there's, to me, the show which we now skipped, and I hope we can come back to that afterwards, the Imperfect Health is of course a very different type of show, because it brings together many elements of different sources. This show is a show which is, I would say, closely related to, indeed, the archive, as you said, with of course the result that you would like to activate that archive. I can imagine, or at least it's not that I can imagine. I think we had that conversation in the past, so I know it's central to your desire. So you want to activate it. Was it then a specific choice to go with 3 different voices and say 3 times looking at it is 3 times selecting? I remember a lot of attention was put also into the decision whether things would be printed. In this case, we photographed. Maybe I should give a little bit of information about this particular show. The show was 3 times held in a small room, which is called Rotonda. Is that what the name is?
Octagonal.
The octagonal, sorry, the octagonal. It's kind of a rotund space, but it's indeed octagonal. This octagonal space is a smaller exhibition space. The other plan we saw before is the bigger one. I would argue it's the space which is the closest to a book in as much that the sequence is quite different. No, I mean, you have one space, you either show everything or together, or you will decide to have different carriers. In our case, I'd say you had a table with drawings, which are printouts of plans from CAD drawings of Ábalos Herreros, well, digital archive, one could say. You had photographs on the wall by Stefano Graziani, which were all newly taken for the show, which are photographs of objects and things, and drawings, also collages sometimes, which we found in the boxes. And then there was, in a way, this set of slides which were projected on these weird objects you see here, which were basically reconstructions, you could say copies, but based on a limited amount of information, of objects which had been once made by Ábalos Herreros for another show. So again, you have many things, very tangible things. Of course, here for me, one of the questions remains. So our show, I mean, I cannot now show the 2 other shows, which were, I think, very interesting as well. I mean, we saw one physically and the other one only in pictures. And the soil show, I remember we saw. A lot of decisions about, I would say, the physicality of the way we present is crucial. How do you look at that, Giovanna? Because in a way, it's a physicality I now need to describe. We were discussing before the talk and the talking kind of fashion today. So it's almost impossible to make them speak for themselves, because you need to see them, you need to feel them, you need to understand their materiality.
So I think the one thing that has been we have reflecting a lot is like also how we, you know, in this period there's been a lot that I also see as a kind of aesthetization of the archive. A lot of things that is about, you know, just putting the archive there, and seems like we have a fascination for all this stuff somehow. That the fact that, and is always also based a bit about the quantity of material, like you are able to amass more, and I also been part of this, you know. I did a show that was called The Other Architect, where, you know, the conservation department wanted to kill me because there were 700 objects, and some were like, you know, just a note on a piece of paper, but let's say it will work if there was that amount, but that amount is also that represents the idea of what is an archive. So like, let's say the meta project of this show is also about the idea that you have an archive and you can also operate a selection on it, and somehow in that sense become your selection. So it plays on the ambiguity that this is not the archive of Ábalos Herreros somehow, it's really what you are selecting there. In fact, you really took a stand in, like, what you see on the table is the digital archive, and somehow you decided to print it. So actually this is not even the archive, because it will never exist in this form. If a scholar comes now, we'll never even see this material. So it's interesting to me because you actually played on this ambiguity of, is the archive the physicality of it, or is the information that carries that is the most important notion. So are the ideas, and so therefore I can also copy them, I can create a new object, or is the letter in its, is that document in itself that is the object of interest. So I think what I like here, and I think also in the 3 exhibition that was done, is that there was a kind of freedom in relation to that question of, like, and somehow the main goal was to, ultimately was not to show the archive, was to show what were the kind of ideas carried by the 2 architects. So you were the first one, and you also brought in that kind of strange object that you saw, that actually showed the slides that we have of all the lectures, all the reference they used in their books, and so on. But this is actually an object that is a replica of a Ábalos Herreros object that they used in a show. And so then you gave us, I have to say, the idea that all the 3 shows, they should carry something that was actually a reenactment of a Ábalos Herreros real piece. So somehow, even if reinterpreted, so somehow also the idea that the archive is maybe a place where you can copy or steal an idea, or reimagine something. So you had that. When you actually played the music that was played in the office, so there was a kind of Spanish rock thing going on all the time. That was a kind of weird, because it will place you in the mindset of what was the music, or what was the atmosphere at the office. And Soil did this kind of drawing carpet that was actually already by Ábalos Herreros, an interpretation of a Richter painting, transformed in a carpet, and so on. So what I like of also this is that there is this new relation with archive that is not just simply selecting the material and put it out there. Is to understand of, like, how you, what of the archive you want to make material.
Yeah, what's central to what you say, Giovanna, I believe, is the idea of materialization. So you materialize digital documents into paper, you print it, you choose a scale. I remember we had a long process in deciding the scale, line weights, and so forth for these digital files. I mean, 2 people at your institute spent months and months and months on kind of actually, first of all, trying to open the files, and then actually choosing line thicknesses. And so there was an interesting set of, in a way, formal decisions, not unlike decisions in architecture in general, to be made to make these printouts in the end. So the replica, as you say, yeah, I was looking at pictures and making a replica. So again, it's about making something. And then the third element, the photographs of Stefano, well, it was of course not at all as random as it might seem. It was like a very specific set, I call it a long list, a short list, and then looking what to photograph and making, to a certain extent, I don't know to what extent that's clear here, but kind of making associations, similarities between collages, drawings, models, because they all become framed in the end in this, through this lens, in this frame hung on the wall, and there's other associations. Perhaps what I want to go to is that through materialization, things exist, and through their existence, there is a kind of a space. That's also why I started a little bit with the place, the room, let's say, where association can happen. That seems quite important. I mean, my experience, at least, the shows we've done, and I mean, now we've only been talking about one, but that seems crucial to it in a sense. And of course, then the question is, not being in the place, not being there, not having a space at all. Yeah, well, is it possible or not at all?
No, it's a very good question, because you know, the physical space of an exhibition is a space. You can imagine that the pages of a book are a space where then you are done with this kind of binary left and right pages, but still you are building a constructed narrative. If we are left to this digital space, then I don't know how the association that you're saying can happen, and the multiplicity of like that you had in this small room of the you know, three simple elements somehow is a kind of slide thing, is a plan and elevation horizontally, and the complexity of other kind of things through the eyes of Stefano. But
Yeah.
you can look at them separately, but you'll understand something in looking to all of them together. So
And also Giovanna, because there's also a decision on form and format, right? I mean, slides you can print out and you show them on the table. I mean, we know all very well the Fishy and Weiss slide table, very beautiful, but different. I mean, the pictures could have not been taken, but could have been in a way the objects as we saw them. But no, their photographs are taken, they're framed. The prints could have been even hung on the wall. So in every decision, there's a decision. I mean, and it changes everything. In some sense.
Yeah, I think this is a very it's actually something that I really enjoy being a curator at CCA. But I have to say, we have been or I have been accused a few times to have a kind of role that goes beyond the work of a curator. So somehow you also play that here, because we decided together how to print those drawings of Ábalos Herreros. We didn't follow, it was not in archive a set to say, okay, you print always on something like this with this thing and so on. I think we also even clean some of the drawings to be
readable, yeah.
to know, in order to take out like redundant information and actually make the drawings talking to each other. So we had a very manipulative role that was clearly recognized in like the visitor was not tricked, but somehow there is in all this decision that we are making, and we've seen it very clearly when we worked with Greg Lean on the 3 Archaeology of the Digital series, that was all based on digital things of like how you take the decision of an AutoCAD drawing, and how that AutoCAD drawing then is revealed, that maybe was never supposed to be shown in an exhibition either. So somehow that's the first betray.
No, sure, but I mean, at the same time, you could say to turn digital into paper is extreme, and it's almost, I would say, completely going against the current state of things, because now we are forced to turn everything physical into digital as we do tonight. Or well, it's my night. It's actually your midday, but okay, I mean, that's already weird enough. I mean, in a sense, and this is very much a show. I mean, you curated together with Mirko Zardini, and it was in a way the first time we were involved in the CCA. So this showed in health show. pretty much the same in some sense, no? I mean, so I think I have a couple of pictures here. I think this is the plan. I think it's interesting for people who do not know the CCA very well to say these 6 rooms we see here are the 6 exhibition rooms. The black line is an intervention 2 times, and the gray is in a way the entrance corridor, which was here in a way integrated mentally, at least in this model, into the thing. Without now immediately going into the say spatial intervention, it's maybe more interesting, Giovanna, to see this almost like the other extreme. No, on the one hand, you have an archive you want to activate, so you show it 3 times, and all decisions you take are physical decisions. At least, if I now oversimplify where we got until now. And now here we have, in a way, a topic, in perfect health. I mean, a team. Very carefully developed by Mirko and yourself, I think. I mean, has to do a lot with to what extent, I mean, I would say solutions always seem to have their downsides in some sense, and how architecture plays an ambiguous role in that. And then you start. I mean, maybe it's good I can click through some images if you want, but that you explain a little bit, Giovanna.
Yeah. Well, I have to say this was done in 2011, and I think, as you said, it was the first show you've been involved in. And I think after our meeting at that pavilion in Venice, I really thought you were the right people to work with us on this, because I think the show had that high level of ambiguity. And not because you are ambiguous people, but I thought that you will be the right people to understand that the show didn't want to have a kind of okay, there is a health problem and now we show you the best hospitals and the best solution to it. It was really about questioning the role of architecture in this, and should architecture cure or care. And you also wrote and made a very nice project that was actually connected to this double role that architecture can play. So I thought that you will be the right architects to understand that the show wanted to pose this question of like what architects can do and what architecture can or not do or should be into. So I think your decision, that was very much also a kind of design decision, but helped us to really reconfigure the content in a way. Each gallery, as you see in the plan, was actually split in 2. So somehow you will enter, like in the first room where you were showing the following slide, and next one, sorry. So you will be in this room, and you actually were surrounded, what you don't see, we're surrounded by sets of beautiful photo that CCA commissioned years ago on all the work of Olmsted and parks. And you were inside the idea of parks as the kind of lungs of the city and so on. And what you will see through these screens that also had this kind of filter that you put, Kersten, and the other room was a kind of blurred. And you had this ambiguity of like the opposite of like, so it will, every room you will find yourself, you didn't understood if this was the reality or was actually somehow the reality was in the other room, and somehow helped this kind of build this contradiction that was fundamental for us to carry the content. So as in typical, let's say, series of exhibitions that we have done at CCA, the material is very varied. It goes from all the kind of things that architecture use to represent their work, but also, as you saw those animals in the first gallery, we might again also commission. So this actually is a gallery that was about epidemics, and we didn't know how to kind of show that. So there was a beautiful image of bus of Cairo on the kind of left of the image. And those animals were commissioned to an artist who is working with paper. Actually worked with Isabella Rossellini in a fantastic film that is called Green Porno, where she has sex with these gigantic animals. And so we asked him to do like this, that were actually what we at that time in 2011 knew as the kind of animals that were carrying epidemics. So the mad cow, the swine flu, and the chicken flu, and so on. So that kind of ambiguity.
In fact, nothing has changed. That's the good.
No,
Nothing.
exactly.
So basically, it's just the same. Yeah, go ahead.
It was interesting. This is just an ad hoc, but to him, because he wanted the measure, so we gave him the Neufert to actually base the animal, and we have the first edition of the Neufert, and so it's interesting because actually the cow was very small. So probably we have seen also the hormone effect on animals now. So actually when you stand near the cow, it's not such a huge cow as we know these days.
But so then, Giovanna, you do a show. I mean, okay, it's true, maybe 2 sentences about the 2 glass walls. I think for us, of course, in this notion of imperfect health, was important, I guess, was that, I mean, architecture doesn't solve anything, which, by the way, I think is an idea we share very much. So, I mean, the glass lines make things visible, but don't make them accessible. At the same time, organize, don't organize. You can go through them in the end. It kind of cuts through the spaces, but the spaces are still somehow read as one. So, I mean, that, of course, ambiguity also obviously related to, let's say, modernist kind of fictions, which are somehow were also an undercurrent, I believe, to the show. Were crucial. So, of course, this is a very, anyway, it's a thing, and I also felt that a little bit with the book, which was an interesting book, but nevertheless, the book didn't quite much manage to show that ambiguity. Already the book not, right? I mean, in the book you have pages show objects at the show, whereas, of course, a very big part of it was how you bring objects in relationship to one another, no? And sometimes tangible, sometimes not, sometimes far away close, sometimes very, very close. As you said, even also the scale of the object, right? I mean, the scale of the cow, as you say, is important the moment you stand next to the cow. It's something with the picture of the cow already has trouble to reproduce. Same thing here with this marvelous drawings of the trees and the famous, was it tree atlas? I don't know the exact name of it. Yeah, it has the Italian name still, as far as I remember. I don't dare to even do an attempt. I mean, but so they're the original drawings.
Yeah.
And that made it also special, of course, to see these. So I don't know, the longer we talk, the more I think the shows are as tangible and as locally bound as proper architecture is. In a sense, the architecture shows, in your case, these kind of shows are as closely related to physical experience as visiting a building is. So in a way, you can reproduce or kind of emulate or kind of make another building. I mean, a building in the most conceptual sense of the word. But then the building you have to see.
Yeah, I think the way probably we try to work in terms of like what is the experience of the show, and I think you have been involved in several at this point, Kersten. Is also how this is why let's say the architect we work with is always involved early on, because we are ready to then change the selection of the object, or how the objects are, or the scale of the object and so on, to actually have that bond somehow. So in that sense, maybe is easier to don't think about the collection as originals, but is also difficult because sometimes it's really not possible. Like sometimes there is a drawing that is fundamental, and we've seen this in other shows we did together, a drawing that is fundamental, and you know it because you have seen it in books, you have it in your mind, and you think and then it's like this. And so, and so then you have that in a gallery and completely disappear. So I think the thing is like how you created that way of entering architecture, that maybe it's not literally entering in a building, but way of entering architecture. And this is something somehow, I don't know, our suggestion, like if you don't know that photo of Bas, you might not know, and if you don't go to look at very near, you don't see how many peaks there are in those photos. But to me, the fact that we place this cow very near, like this animal, like you tune your eyes to the fact that you were actually, you knew that you were in a gallery where there were some animals somewhere, and then you had to look for it, you know, like, and then you felt like you were in presence of this other body there. So
no, I understand, Giovanna, but at the same time you could argue that is true what you say, but then we know that you're running an institution started by Phyllis Lambert in Montreal consciously, not in New York, because she cares about the city. So she says, I want to invest in that city. I want to, you know, make that place a place of architecture very much. So the building is built, the collection is built up, is made. But of course, you have to go to Montreal. So I have the impression, especially in the last couple of years with Mirko and now with you and Mirko, the books became very important, I have the impression, because I mean, and I noticed the books are made after the show. I mean, the other architects, I have unfortunately no pictures of it here. I mean, the other architect show which you curated, very important show. The book is important. I only saw the book and never managed to go to Montreal. I suspect the book was made while you were making the show. I mean, if I can use, besides history, which I could show here very soon as a reference. In other words, is it only possible to make that book the moment the show is made? And does the physical reality of the show help you to make these type of decisions? Is that then the way somehow the after product does carry the DNA of what has been discovered? Is the show, in other words, I would say, an expedition where you discover things, you discover liaisons, relationships, connections, and only after that you can come to that conclusion? I don't know.
Yes and no. I would say, well, one thing is, you know, I had dinner the other night with Phyllis in a very distantiated way, but we were able to talk in the same garden, let's say, and she was asking me of like, what do we do with exhibitions if these things continue? Will still be meaningful to do exhibition if nobody really comes to see it, like not even people in Montreal somehow, you know. So I thought it was a radical question from her, as she obviously cares very much about exhibition and is very much part of our institution core. I don't know. So, but she's radical, and this is why it's fun. But I think the question is of like what is the role of the exhibition? I think we never really thought as the exhibition as a kind of final thing, has always been a way of understanding or as a kind of research project that is the output. That is the moment of, I don't say a validation, but sort of like a pressure moment to validate if that hypothesis and that ideas are shareable somehow. And I think that sometimes the book has the same strength, and sometimes, as you pointed out, maybe doesn't do the same job. Now, we don't, with a series like the one besides history that you were showing, like this series, we always do the book after, because we want the show to be in. So the show is photographed and is part of the narrative. And in that sense, I really think doing the exhibition and then after the book is crucial, because I don't think we would have done that book in that way if we didn't do the exhibition. For other things, like the other architect, for example, is much more actually in done at the same time, and it's very much thought of like how the idea of that kind of story that you see in the exhibition can be obviously even edited in a much stronger way in the book. In fact, when the exhibition traveled and, for example, went to Colombia, we actually used the selection of the book to then reduce the show. And many people say it was actually a much better show because it was actually even more edited. So I think it's interesting how the book has give you this opportunity to even do a much more thoughtful editing on your own ideas.
But going back to Phyllis, so you had a conversation with Big Distance, and she was wondering about the future of an institution which core business is exposing today, and what comes out of such a conversation?
Was actually something that also was discussed at the board. Other board members asked me about this. I don't know. To me, I think the process of doing in the exhibition is fundamental for an institution like the CCA. Is a place, the exhibition, where this conversation of like that we are having now, like what is an archive, how you materialize, what you select, what is digestible for an audience to actually even what is interesting to look at, why I should read these sets of letters as a visit, like all these questions. I think if there will not be the exhibition, I don't know where will be the space of doing that. So I think the exhibition are fundamental, and I'm scared when I see now this kind of literal transliteration of exhibition in kind of digital model where you just go around and move your mouse and physically go like this. I find terrible. Like this.
So you seem to say, Giovanna, and I have to say, okay, I'm really not a specialist, but I have the tendency to agree that it's the process of physical translation. I mean, one kind of material, very digital, CAD drawings, into another, printed paper, for example, a print, small, big, deciding to make a reproduction rather than to show the original because of a problem of size. I mean, I don't have good drawings, but here Hasegawa, who was, we did a show here together with, who made these fantastic wall drawings. I don't have anyone here, unfortunately, in the series, enlarging in a way drawings of buildings and drawing them, printing them on the wall. So this process, I mean, is extremely precise also, I think, with physical process, which is, I would say, central to making the show. It seems to be the main driving force in this, I would say, research, if I could call it that way, or in this kind of rearrangement, in this process of making another product, which then, as you were saying, in some cases is maybe the book and the show together, the other architect, but still I believe the book kind of travels together with the show and they land together, but nevertheless they have influenced each other in how you make decisions. In other moments the book comes after the show, and obviously then the book is perhaps even one step after that show and has to make another set of decisions still after a whole bunch of decisions were made for making the show. The moment you take this away, you make in a way a publication now, if we stick to that, without context, without context, without process, without in a way almost raison d'etre. Is that it? I mean, I have a feeling your fear situates itself there.
Yeah, especially and especially I think for this kind of research based or ideas based, I would say, exhibition or topic, like say.
In a sense, of course, heavily influenced by you. Sorry, Giovanna, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, it's fine. I think for this one, as you described, the process to me of like understanding how you transfer that idea to something that we can share and provoke that question, is the exhibition is fundamental. Now we have started a series of other publications that are not exhibition based. Actually the first one is with Stefano, who when he came last time as CCA was fascinated by Gordon Matta Clark personal library, so is actually a photographic essay of his work in representing again a kind of a library of that we have as CCA with kind of all the obsession of Gordon Matta Clark. So, but that to me is a very different program than the exhibition one. So I would say that no, the exhibition are fundamental. I will not.
And is the exhibition there equally an attempt to bring in, I would say, time or slowness or slow? My English is not good enough to choose the right word here, but in a sense that, well, you say you have a lot of things, an architect, an archive, or a topic, then you can click, so to speak. You bring it all in a kind of a Venn diagram, kind of a container, and you show. This is what you see quite often in current internet practices, without any offense to these practices. But I do have the feeling that in this, of course, in this particular process of making the shows, these things go slow. I've always had the feeling that in our cultural practice, and I believe we are part of the cultural practice, I mean us, you, I mean, many of our colleagues, the main luxury is say that you can create time for yourself, you know, that you can be slow, and in that slow process, you can densify a meaning, you can make associations, you can remain ambiguous, as you said. But at the same time, the ambiguity is the ambiguity of a very dense object, whether that object is a show or a book or both, or even a building, I believe. I'm saying it also because I think we experienced in our office now during 3 months of confinement, or 4 months now already, or 4.5, I even forgot how long we are kind of semi-confined, all of us here in the world, but that, that by working, at least in the beginning, more digitally and less physically in the office, things got much faster. I mean, clients were much happier, but we were much less happy. Because in some strange way, the typical delay which is there and, you know, rearranging what the physical somehow creates was gone. So the answers were fast, but I wasn't any more sure if the doubt was still present. And I don't know, I have the feeling that maybe there's other ways in the future to emulate doubt and time and, you know, slowness. But to me, that seems to be, even in a place like Montreal, seems crucial, that you make this show slow, and then the book which comes out is not simply the book, which is the kind of the quick accumulation of all the elements you brought together. I don't know, I mean, perhaps too much.
I never thought it in that way, but certainly this question of time, and I think is many different ideas of time, is also the time for like I think the beauty of designing a show is that you can somehow or imagine to have we don't have the control of the visitors, but you can decide a pace of the visitor somehow, and what is the accumulation of ideas that come to the person, you know. So like in a recent show that was curated by Francesco Garuti about happiness, it was very beautifully done, the fact that each gallery you will be understanding a new thing, and was very conscious the fact that every gallery you will say, aha, okay, so this is now and the experience was cumulative. So this is not even like, you know, you might do with a book if you kind of imagine that the person really disciplined read essay 1, essay 2, essay 3, but we know very well this is not what is happening. Or with a magazine, it's like you go through and you just read the order you want, maybe even if there is an order that the editor or the curator made. So this idea of time, I think, is an interesting, and is the time of production, is the time of absorption also of the
yeah, but also to me the time of production, because I have the feeling, our experience again, that the productions in the CCA take a long time. I mean, from the initial idea to the actual physical version, whether book or exhibition, a long time passes, which seems crucial to a certain extent, that the whole thing densifies, kind of gets saturated to a certain extent. I don't know.
I think actually one of the things that the first things we discussed in January, where I became director, I say that I would like to introduce like 3 paces. So one is very fast, and like I will simplify. It's not like with trains, but like very fast train. So everybody knows there is no stop. Like if you take a train fast in Norway, and there are too many people, like they close the door, like they have a kind of like, so so if it's a fast train, is a project where we don't doubt of our own idea somehow. Mm-hmm. So we don't have that luxury to have a rethinking and so on. There should be not a big quantity of this fast project, but maybe because time, that idea is relevant now. In 6 months will not be interesting anymore. So we need to do this in a kind of fast pace. There are projects that, for example, this thematic, that should have more time because society is changing around you and you might doubt of your work. Like I'm working on a show now that for next year, was this year, is called New Society. You can imagine how many times we are revising now the content, because society is so much changing around us that the content is like every week is like, okay, this might not be interesting anymore. This is like, so this you need a time, because you need also to have the luxury of having an idea and throwing. I think it's like an architectural practice. If you can design something and have the opportunity to put it in the garbage and maybe produce a second idea, or if you don't have that. I'm not saying that there is a quality. It might be that the first idea is the good and it's good to go like this, but to have the time to doubt of your position, I think as a cultural institution is fundamental. So what I want is that we are conscious of this decision, that we don't say each thing's last 2 years and we go into this kind of automatic machine, but we are conscious of this. And then there is projects that I want to establish that are 10 years. You know, CCA did some of this in the past, and then 10 years is a large project, but a lot of other projects can get in, and where you really can learn a lot, and you can also learn as an institution, and you can invite many more people to be in conversation with you. So this is why I'm maybe my role now is more about designing this mechanism that allow others to design their own or curate their own things inside this different. So pace is fundamental, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, honestly, Giovanna, I think I remember, or I'd say I remember many things. I was very happy we could have this chat in our virtual room. As you say, place is important. I have the impression time to doubt is important too. Time here, in my case, is very literal, because I honestly have to move my screen a bit because the sun enters and then kind of makes me visible. Well, I think it's, in many respects, it represents what we're dealing with. I believe it is fighting for a space, which I think a space is, of course, also a space where, I mean, a certain period of time passes, where you still have the possibility to create ambiguity through, I would say, very, very conscious, very, very focused, but nevertheless open research. Thanks a lot. I was very happy to have this conversation.